The mockery. The sun burned hot above the Central Asian proving ground, and a long line of armored shapes stood silent in the dust. The tanks were old, their paint faded, their metal worn, engines coughing dark smoke when they started. Across the viewing platform stood the alien delegation of the Keth Dominion, tall gray beings with smooth faces and bright silver eyes. They had come to see what humanity had to offer in the coming planetary defense pact. When the covers came off the tanks and the names were read aloud, the Keth began to laugh. They called them museum pieces and relics of primitive war. To them, this display was a joke from a dying world. Rhea Da stood beside one of the tanks, wiping oil from her hands. She was small, quiet, and carried the look of someone who had not slept in days. She had spent years studying old steel and forgotten circuits. Beside her was Commander Marko Iliev, a man built from muscle and scars, born from the last human ground war. His tank, a rebuilt T-34, looked like it should have been rusted to dust long ago. Yet when he climbed inside and placed his hand on the console, the old machine seemed to breathe again. There was something alive beneath the iron. Rhea looked up at the alien platform. The Keth envoys were still laughing, their translators echoing in broken human words about backward evolution and lost potential. The generals looked uneasy. The whole demonstration had been meant to show Earth's readiness to defend itself, not invite mockery. But Rhea whispered to Marko that it was time. The secret they carried would speak louder than words. Marko gave a small nod, closed the hatch, and switched on the Starborn core. At first nothing happened. Then a hum rose from deep inside the tank, low and steady like a heartbeat. The ground underfoot trembled as the machine began to glow faintly around its seams. The old steel plates that had seen 100 battles seemed to ripple as if they remembered every fight they had ever survived. Marko's crew took their positions, each man and woman touching the control rings embedded in the metal. The hum deepened and spread, reaching the other tanks lined up in the dust. One by one they awoke. A Keth scout drone floated closer, its lenses whirring. A thin energy beam fired from it, meant to scan the tank's weak points. But when the beam touched the T-34's hull, it curved away like water sliding off stone. The alien technicians blinked in disbelief. Marko grinned inside the tank and gave a command. The machine surged forward with impossible speed, treads cutting the ground like a living creature running at full sprint. The T-34 stopped sharply and aimed its cannon toward a target drone high above. A pulse of light erupted from the barrel, silent and precise, slicing the drone in half. The fragments burned out before hitting the ground. Silence fell across the proving ground. The laughter had stopped. The Keth delegation stared with unblinking eyes. Humans who had come to watch began to cheer. The generals turned to Rhea, demanding to know what they had just seen. She explained that every tank had been fitted with a Starborn core, ancient technology found in a forgotten lunar ruin 2 decades ago. It could not be copied by alien science or human industry, only awakened by will. It linked the minds of crew members in harmony, creating a field that amplified control and reaction, bending probability around them. The older the machine, the stronger the bond, because the simpler the design, the fewer barriers between human thought and metal. Marko climbed out of the hatch, dust clinging to his uniform. The Keth spokesman approached, face tight with forced calm. He asked how long Earth had been hiding such technology. Marko only smiled and said that humanity never hid it. The star simply never believed humans could find it. The spokesman said these toys would not stand against the fleets of the Dominion. Marko replied softly that they would not need to. He turned to his crew and ordered the engines to idle. The tanks settled into silence again, their glow fading but not dying as the Keth ships lifted from the field and vanished into the high blue sky. Rhea stood beside Marko, watching the dust swirl behind them. She told him that the Starborn cores were not fully understood, that they whispered to her through the data streams, offering visions of a war long before humanity's birth. Marko told her that whatever those whispers were, they had just bought Earth one thing it had not owned in generations: respect. Somewhere far above, Keth commanders reviewed their recordings and saw old human tanks move like predators made of steel and fire. They had laughed once. They would not laugh again. The truth inside steel. The next morning, the proving ground lay silent under a pale sky and the smell of burned sand. Where the old tanks had stood, there were only deep tread marks like scars. The Keth had departed in their shining craft, leaving behind cold looks and hollow promises. On every human channel, their laughter replayed until the moment it stopped, replaced by the impossible sight of ancient armor outrunning alien drones. The world began to argue. Some called it a trick. Others called it a miracle. Ria Das knew it was neither. It was science wrapped in something older than science. Something that spoke to the will of those who dared to fight when reason said surrender. She sat inside a repair hangar surrounded by open cores, each one a black sphere wrapped in fine silver veins. They hummed faintly when touched, like deep voices just beyond hearing. Marko Iliev walked in with his jacket still dusty from the test and asked her what she had found. She explained that every core responded differently to different crews. It measured trust and turned it into strength. When men and women worked together without fear or anger, the field that formed around them bent light, heat, and even chance. It was not the machine that fought, it was the bond itself amplified through old steel. The modern tanks with too many processors and safety limits could not connect cleanly. Their own systems got in the way. Outside, the generals called for a demonstration campaign. The Kiev had challenged Earth to meet them again, not in secret but in open trial. They would bring their skirmish units to the lunar surface and humanity could test its so-called starborn force against them. It was meant as humiliation, one last laugh before war. Marko volunteered at once. He wanted to take the same T-34 and a crew of 5, one from each continent. Ria hesitated but agreed to go as the systems engineer. She wanted to see what the core would do in the void. The team trained in silence, learning every bolt and breath of their machine. They slept beside it, ate beside it, and soon the hum of the core matched the rhythm of their own hearts. When launch day came, the old transport shuttles carried them up to the lunar plains where a base had been carved out for the contest. The Keth sent 3 skirmish craft, sleek silver wings with plasma talons. The alien commander greeted them over an open channel, voice smooth and full of amusement. He said he would not fire to kill, only to demonstrate superiority. Marko said he would try to remember the same courtesy. The signal cut and the battle began. The first plasma strike came down in a blinding line of white light. Dust rose like smoke. When it cleared, the T-34 was gone. The Keth scanners searched frantically. Then the old tank erupted from beneath the ground, having tunneled through loose soil using the kinetic field of the core to melt a path. It fired once. One skirmisher split apart without sound, only a flash of light. The remaining aliens circled faster than anything human-made. Marko's team held formation, voices calm, hands steady. Ria watched the readings spike. The crew's heartbeats aligned. The tank moved with them, not against them. The Kiev commander ordered a full barrage, but each beam missed by inches, bent aside by invisible pressure. When the tank countered, the shot seemed to curve in midair, finding its mark as if the world itself guided it. Within minutes, the alien craft lay broken across the plains. The lunar dust settled around them like snowfall. Humanity had won without losing a single soul. After the match, the Keth delegation approached again, but this time they did not laugh. They asked to examine the core. The answer was no. General Okoye, who had come to witness the test, declared that the technology would remain under human control. The Keth spoke of alliances and trade and left without another word. Yet Ria saw something in their eyes before they turned away. A flicker of fear, a flash of calculation. She knew they would come back, not for friendship but for study, and perhaps for conquest. That night in the quiet lunar base, Marko sat on the hull of his tank, looking at Earth hanging bright above. He said the stars had finally noticed humanity again. Ria sat beside him and told him of a message she had found hidden in the data from the core. It was written in human script, though no one could say how long it had been there. It said, "Do not fire in anger." She asked him what he thought it meant. He said maybe the cores knew something about the cost of rage, maybe they had seen it before. Ria looked at the faint light pulsing under the armor and felt a strange sadness mixed with pride. They had shown the universe what Earth could do, but she could not shake the sense that the starborn power came with a price not yet paid. Above them, the stars were silent, watching, waiting for what humanity would do next. The first clash of armies. The lunar victory spread through every channel and every city like a fire that could not be hidden. For the first time in living memory, the human world lifted its head with pride. The old tanks that once sat forgotten in museums were now being pulled from storage and shipped to factories where new starborn cores were fitted into their bellies. Ria Das watched rows of them moving on rails through assembly lines as welders and mechanics sang work songs that echoed through the steel halls. It felt like a heartbeat growing louder every hour, but pride had a cost and the Keth Dominion did not take humiliation quietly. From the dark edge of the solar system came a fleet of warships that blocked the light of distant stars. The message they sent to Earth was short. They demanded surrender of the Starborn technology. If refused, they would test it again, and full War General Imani Okoye called for a meeting of all Starborn crews in the vast desert base once used for nuclear testing. She stood tall, her voice calm as she announced that humanity would not kneel. She told them that this was no longer a contest or a show of power. It was survival. Marco Iliev stood among the crews, his face grim but steady. Ria sat beside him, running her hands over a small core in her lap. She had learned to feel its pulse like a living creature. When General Okoye asked for volunteers to fight on the ground, Marco stepped forward before she even finished the sentence. The others followed, forming a line of iron and resolve that stretched to the horizon. When the Keith landed on Mars, humanity met them in the dunes of the Red Planet. The old tanks were painted in simple colors with no flags, only unit names scratched into their sides like scars. The Keth brought walkers made of silver and glass that moved like spiders, each one taller than a tower and armed with heat lances that could melt stone. The first battle began at dawn. The alien walkers advanced in perfect formation, their plasma fire burning the sand into glass. Marco's battalion spread out and vanished into the dunes. The Keth scanners saw nothing until the Earth itself rose against them. The Starborn tanks came from all sides, their treads gliding over terrain as if gravity itself bent to them. They fired in rhythm, shells and beams mixing into a storm of light. The Keth formations broke and scattered. Ria rode in a command vehicle, watching data streams burst across her screen. The cores sang in unison across the network she had built. It was not just communication. It was emotion shared between machines and humans. When one tank fell, the others felt the loss as a hollow echo in their own hearts. Yet they did not falter. They fought harder. One of those echoes struck deep when a tank under Marco's command took a direct hit and burned out completely. Inside was Stepan, the youngest of the crew. His last transmission carried no words, only a song they had sung during training. The chorus faded, and Marco closed his eyes for one breath before pushing forward again. The others followed without question. The battle raged for 3 days. The Keth walkers adapted fast, switching to sonic disruptors that tore through dunes and rock alike. The human tanks moved faster than sensors could lock. They fought from shadows and smoke, never holding still long enough to be destroyed. When the last Keth ship tried to retreat, General Okoye gave the command to chase them down. The Starborn crews did not hesitate. They struck from orbit, their cores burning with shared focus. The final blow split the alien flagship and sent its remains crashing into the red dust. Mars was silent again. After the battle, Ria examined the readings from every core. She found a strange pattern that appeared whenever anger took hold. When a crew fought with rage, the core's power faltered, its pulse flickering like a dying flame. When they fought with courage and calm, it grew stronger and steadier. She remembered the warning etched inside the first core, "Do not fire in anger." Now she began to understand. The Starborn power was not built for destruction, but for defense through unity. It punished fury and rewarded harmony. She shared this with Marco, who sat in the open air beside his scarred tank. He nodded slowly and said maybe that was what made it human in orbit. The Keth survivors recorded the loss and sent it back to their command world. The message carried more than defeat. It carried fear. They had learned that Earth's strength was not in machines but in the connection between those who refused to break. Across the stars, the Dominion began to prepare for a longer war. Back on Mars, under the dim light of 2 moons, Ria looked up at the sky and whispered that if they came again, they would find not relics but a people who had remembered what it meant to stand together. Laughter turns to fear, war that began on Mars reached the ears of every world within the Keth Dominion, and it carried a single truth that no one had believed possible, that humanity had stood, and that they had won. On Earth, the people rebuilt their factories and opened the old vaults where forgotten armor rested under dust. Across continents, men and women gathered to serve, not for conquest but because they could feel something moving inside them when they saw the tanks roar to life. Ria Das worked without sleep inside the command center in Geneva, surrounded by maps glowing red with alien movements. The Keth had lost a battle but not the war. They were learning, adapting, and soon they would return in greater numbers. Ria had decoded fragments from captured enemy transmissions and saw how the Keth spoke of the Starborn cores as cursed relics of a lost civilization. They wanted to study them, to break their mystery and to silence the humans who had revived them. The next strike came faster than anyone expected. Without warning, Keith's ships appeared in orbit above Earth's equator, their sleek hulls shining like silver knives. They did not attack cities or fleets first. Instead, they targeted communications and satellites, cutting human coordination in minutes. Panic spread through command lines. Raya realized they were not trying to destroy humanity but to make it blind and divided again. General Okoye gathered her officers and declared that the only answer was unity stronger than ever before. She ordered all Starborn crews to assemble at a hidden base in the Sahara, the same place where the first cores had awakened. Marko Iliev arrived there with his crew, his tank scarred from Mars but still humming softly as if alive. When night fell, the desert glowed faintly under alien light. Keth drones rained fire on distant dunes but could not find the base, for the Starborn field bent signals away. Inside the command dome, Rhea revealed a discovery she had kept secret since Mars. She had found another layer within the cores, a pattern that could link not just one tank crew, but entire battalions into a single harmonic network. If activated, it could make their coordination instant and perfect. Yet it carried risk because if one mind broke, the pain might spread through all. Marko listened silently before saying that risk was a price worth paying, because the next battle would decide everything. Before dawn came, the Keth deployed a new weapon. Ships that floated low above the ground, their hulls covered in mirror glass that reflected the desert and confused targeting systems. They began to project psychic interference, voices whispering doubt into human minds. Crews reported hearing lost loved ones or seeing their own fears in flashes of light. Some broke and fled, but one unit held firm. It was led by Zara Haddad, commander of a rebuilt Tiger tank known as Ghost. Her voice over the radio was calm, and even as she spoke to her crew about her home in Cairo, about the river and the sound of prayer bells, her words steadied the link, and soon the whispers faded. Rhea recorded the pattern and realized that courage spoken out loud could disrupt the psychic field. The Starborn cores responded not to orders but to emotion, to the choice to stand firm in the face of fear. With the interference broken, General Okoye gave the command to counterattack. Hundreds of Starborn tanks surged out of the sand like a tide of iron. They moved faster than the Keth could track, their weapons glowing with blue light. The desert turned into a storm of fire and light as alien machines met human will. For every tank destroyed, two more pushed forward, driven by the pulse of shared rhythm. The Keth began to fall back, their formation collapsing under the relentless advance. Above the chaos, Rhea extended her experiment, linking the units through a prototype amplifier. The voices of dozens of crews merged into one chorus that moved like a living army, predicting attacks before they came and striking with precision no machine could match. When the dust cleared, the ground was littered with shattered alien steel. The Keth had retreated beyond the atmosphere. Humanity had won again, but the cost was heavy. Many crews lay silent, minds burned by the strain of the link. Rhea wept as she moved through the medical tents, listening to the faint hum of weakened cores. Marko found her there and told her that victory always demanded something in return. She said she feared what would happen if the link was ever forced open wider. He answered that when the enemy learned to fear them, it would be too late for doubt. From their command ship high above the planet, the Keth commanders watched the footage. They saw tanks that moved as if alive, soldiers who shared a single heartbeat, and machines that ignored the laws of physics. Their laughter was gone, replaced by quiet calculation and unease. They realized the truth too late. Humanity had not rediscovered an old weapon. They had awakened something older, something that remembered how to fight for freedom and would not rest again. The price of the bridge. In the days that followed the Battle of the Sahara, Earth became a planet that no longer feared the stars. The cities that had been silent now sang with industry as people forged armor and rebuilt. Engines from the skeletons of fallen alien ships. Every nation gave what it could, and for the first time in centuries there was no border that mattered more than survival. The old tanks stood in rows under wide hangars, each one humming softly, each one waiting for its next heartbeat. Rhea walked among them with exhaustion heavy in her steps and hope burning in her chest. She had discovered the secret of the link between crews and machines, but she also knew that every victory came with a hidden cost. Some soldiers never woke after battle, their minds left drifting somewhere between flesh and steel. She carried their names in a small notebook she never opened. General Okoye called her to the High Command Dome, where a new plan was taking shape. The Keth had retreated to the edge of the system but had not stopped moving. Intelligence from long-range probes showed a vast assembly of ships building in the shadow of Jupiter. They were preparing a planetary strike, one that could end everything in a single wave of fire. The general spoke without fear and said there would be no retreat. Humanity would meet the storm head-on, and to do that the bridge must be completed. The bridge was the full version of Rhea's harmonic network that could unite all Starborn crews under one consciousness. It would make them faster and stronger than anything the galaxy had seen, but if one heart faltered, the pain could destroy all of them at once. Marko Iliev arrived at the command dome covered in grease and sand. He had been training new recruits, teaching them how to listen to the hum of their tanks, how to breathe with them as one. When he heard about the bridge, he looked at Rhea and said that fear could not be allowed to rule the choice. The Keth were coming, and they would burn everything if humanity hesitated. Rhea hesitated anyway. She remembered the faces of the soldiers who had collapsed during the last link test. Eyes open, but minds gone quiet like extinguished stars. She told Marko that she would not lead the bridge unless it was tested again safely. The general gave her 48 hours to prove it could work. In the cold desert night, she gathered 3 volunteer crews and placed their tanks in a circle around the first amplifier tower. The wind howled, carrying the scent of oil and metal. She sat in the control chamber with her hands on the interface. When she activated the bridge, a low vibration ran through the air, spreading from one tank to the next. The crews began to breathe in rhythm. At first it was beautiful, a steady unity that made every movement seamless. Then the pulse deepened, faster, harder until the screens blurred and the air trembled. One of the gunners screamed and the link cut out. Rhea rushed outside and saw him shaking, alive but unable to speak. His commander knelt beside him, whispering words of comfort. The test had worked for a moment, but the cost was still too high. The next day, news came that the Keth fleet had moved out from Jupiter and was heading toward Earth at speed. General Okoye declared full mobilization. Across the world, the last reserves of fuel were poured into engines. Civilians helped carry shells and water for the crews. In the midst of this chaos, Rhea stood before the amplifier tower, knowing there was no time left. She had no choice but to lead the bridge herself. She connected the cores to her neural link and felt their hum vibrate through her bones. Marko climbed into his tank and saluted her across the desert. The army lined up behind him. Thousands of machines, old and new, their hulls reflecting the dawn. As the enemy ships entered the upper atmosphere, the sky turned red. Lightning streaked across clouds of burning dust. The first Keth bombardment fell on the ocean, raising waves taller than towers. Then the tanks began to move. The bridge opened wide, and Rhea's mind filled with thousands of voices merging into one. She felt every heartbeat, every thought, every shout of fear and defiance. The power was overwhelming, but she held on. The tanks surged forward faster than sound, leaving trails of light behind them. The Keth walkers landed and met the charge head-on. Their plasma burned across the desert, but could not stop the tide. In the middle of the chaos, Marko's battalion struck through the enemy flank. He could feel the rhythm of every crew moving with him, guiding him before each shot. When one tank fell, he felt the pain, but also the determination of the others to push harder. Rhea's vision blurred as the bridge strained under the pressure. She saw flashes of lives, families waiting at home, the memories of soldiers who fought not for glory but for each other. The cores burned white-hot, their hum turning into a deep roar that echoed across the planet. The Keth formation broke under the combined force. Their command ship tried to retreat, but Marko's tank fired the final shot that pierced its reactor and turned it into a star above the desert. When the smoke cleared, the world was silent, except for the faint hum of surviving tanks. The Keth fleet was gone. The bridge flickered and faded. Rhea lay unconscious at the base of the amplifier tower, surrounded by a faint glow. She had held the link until the last enemy fell, and in doing so she had saved humanity but burned her own mind in the process. Marko found her there and carried her out under the rising sun. He said softly that she had paid the price of the bridge, and because of that the world still had a future. Around them the soldiers cheered, their machines silent witnesses to the victory bought by courage and sacrifice. The chorus of Starborn. Horizon burned with the light of alien engines as the Keth fleet descended upon the desert plains, where humanity had gathered every Starborn tank and crew. The sky was filled with streaks of plasma fire and metallic screams that shook the earth. Rhea Das had recovered enough from the last bridge to stand once more at the amplifier core, her hands resting lightly on the interface, feeling the pulse of hundreds of human minds as one. Each heartbeat carried courage and fear in equal measure, but she kept them steady, guiding them like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Marko Iliev climbed into his T-34, his crew alert and ready, the hum of the core already syncing with the others around him. Around them, the desert trembled as machines that had been silent for decades roared to life with a song of steel and unity. The Keth scouts moved first, shadow-like walkers skimming across dunes to probe the defenses. Their plasma lances cut through sand and stone, leaving smoking craters. The human tanks responded in rhythm, moving in patterns no human eye could fully follow. Rhea opened the bridge wider than ever before, letting the pulse flow through every tank, every operator, until they were linked not just by signal but by thought. Each crew felt the weight and motion of the others, the fear, the hope, the promise of returning home. The desert became alive with movement, a single organism of flesh, metal, and determination. The Keith commander realized too late that this was not a battle fought with technology alone, but with the very essence of humanity's will. Marko led the central line, weaving between enemy fire and guiding isolated tanks to flank the alien walkers. He felt the bridge hum through him, felt the hesitation of crews trying to break formation, and steadied them with a thought that rippled like water through the network. Each tank fired in perfect timing, each shell and pulse bending around the enemy as if the earth itself moved to protect them. From the amplifier tower, Rhea watched the battlefield unfold in waves of blue light and shadows. The chorus sang through every core, and though the Keth fired psychic interference, whispering lies and threats, the human soldiers did not falter. They answered with memory, the smell of rain on home soil, the touch of a parent, the voice of a loved one. That connection was stronger than fear or death. The battle escalated as the Keth unleashed their dreadship, larger than any structure ever seen, a moving fortress that glowed with an inner fire. It targeted the amplifier tower, aiming to sever the bridge and shatter the network before it could guide humanity to victory. Rhea's mind reached into the chorus and held it steady, feeling every pulse, every thought, every shared fear and courage. The amplifier pulsed brighter, the cores vibrating with energy that bent light and space in small waves. Marko maneuvered his tank beneath the dreadship, firing continuously in a pattern only the bridge could calculate. Each shot was guided by the shared consciousness of every Starborn crew, striking the weak points the Keth had thought hidden. For every walker destroyed, the dreadship lost balance, its massive hull twisting with sparks and molten seams. A small figure moved among the ranks, Leo, a young trainee, his voice rising over the chorus, steady and fearless. Rhea felt his energy join the bridge, amplifying the pulse. Every soldier, every tank, every human within range became a single mind with one purpose. The Keth tried to sow discord, sending hallucinations and echoes of terror, but the bridge bent them back with clarity and courage. The dreadship roared, shaking the earth, but the chorus of Starborn minds held the ground. In a final moment of coordination, Marko rammed his T-34 into the flank of the dreadship, guided by the bridge to hit the precise spot that would destabilize the alien engine. Sparks and fire erupted, and the dreadship toppled like a falling mountain, scattering the remaining fleet across the desert. The aftermath was deafening in silence. The desert was littered with broken alien steel and the smoking remains of tanks that had given their all. Yet through the amplifier, the soft hum of the surviving Starborn cores remained, like a heartbeat echoing over the battlefield. Rhea collapsed to her, knees exhausted, her mind still linked to hundreds of others. She could feel their relief, their awe, and their grief all at once. Marko climbed beside her. Mud and blood streaked across his face and told her that they had done what no one thought possible. Humanity had stood as one, and even the stars had taken notice in the skies above. The Keth retreating fleet shimmered, a ghostly line that would not return soon. Humanity had not only survived, but had proven that even the oldest machines, guided by courage and trust, could surpass technology built to intimidate and destroy. Rhea and Marko watched the sunrise, the desert calm at last, feeling the echo of the chorus fade into quiet, ready to rise again if needed. The Starborn had sung their song, a song of unity, of sacrifice, of the true power that comes when humanity chooses to face fear together and stand unbroken against the darkness. Humanity rises. The desert was quiet at last, the smoke of the Keth fleet drifting into the morning sky as the first light of Earth reached the horizon. The Starborn tanks stood in rows like sentinels, their cores still humming softly, carrying the memories of every battle, every heartbeat shared in the chorus. Ria Das sat beside the amplifier tower, her hands resting on the console, feeling the lingering pulse of minds she had guided and protected. Marco Iliev approached, walking over the sand that was still warm from the fires of combat. He looked out at the horizon and said quietly that the stars had learned a lesson, that laughter no longer ruled over fear, and that humanity had found a strength it had almost forgotten. Ria nodded, knowing the victory had come at a price, but also knowing that the cost had awakened something in every human heart. Across the world, people rose to the news. Cities that had been quiet during the battles erupted in celebration and awe. Survivors of the Starborn crews returned home, their steps careful but proud, carrying stories of courage and unity that would live in memory for generations. Children ran their hands over old tanks in museums, listening to the tales of crews who had faced impossible odds, machines that had moved like living beasts, and a chorus that had bound minds together into a single unstoppable force. The world realized that humanity had not only defended itself, but had also discovered a way to make ordinary people extraordinary when they chose to act together, when they trusted one another above all else. Ria and Marco were called to the new command center, where the surviving Starborn crews had gathered. Plans were being made to rebuild the forces on Earth, to train new crews and to recover other human colonies lost to the stars. The cores that had survived were placed in new tanks and stored in fortified bunkers, their hum a reminder of what had been achieved and what could be achieved again. Elder Kale of the Firstborn, who had come from the distant human colonies, stood beside General Okoye and declared that the Starborn pattern could now be carried beyond machines. Humans could awaken it in themselves in small ways at first, using trust, courage, and unity. The bridge had shown them the way, and now it was a legacy to be carried forward into the unknown. Even as the Keth retreated beyond known space, their commanders reviewed the battle footage, their silence heavy with unease. They had underestimated the humans, thinking them weak and slow, yet humanity had moved as one, their minds linked in harmony and their machines responding to thought and will. The Dominion had lost a chance to crush a fledgling species, and learned instead that strength came in forms they could not comprehend. The borders of human space were secured for now, but the warning remained clear: humanity was rising, and it would not bow again to laughter or intimidation. In the quiet that followed, Ria walked among the tanks, feeling the residual hum of the cores through her hands. Each one carried not just technology but memory, courage, and the shared heartbeat of those who had fought together. Marco stood beside her, his eyes on the rising sun, and he told her that the bridge had proven something vital, that the Starborn were not machines, nor weapons, nor mere relics of a forgotten past. They were a reflection of what humans could be when they trusted each other completely, when they chose unity over fear, when they let courage guide their actions rather than anger. Humanity had been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated, yet it had risen to meet the challenge and had claimed its place among the stars. Orders were given for the first of the homebound fleet to launch. New ships built with lessons learned from the Starborn tanks and crews. They would seek out lost colonies, secure human worlds, and carry the chorus of unity wherever it was needed. Ria and Marco watched the launches, the engines cutting through the atmosphere with fire and sound, knowing that the bridge was no longer just an amplifier, but a seed of future strength. The children who had once touched museum tanks would grow to be pilots, engineers, and leaders, carrying the Starborn pattern in their minds, ready to awaken it when the time came. Humanity would no longer wait to be challenged. It would rise before the challenge came, as the last ship disappeared into the night sky. Ria felt the soft pulse of the Starborn cores fade into a steady heartbeat within her own mind. She turned to Marco and whispered that the stars would never mock humanity again, and he nodded with a quiet smile, knowing it was true. The bridges had been built, the chorus had sung, and humanity had awakened to its own potential. Across the planets, across the deserts, and into the void beyond, humanity rose unbroken, starborn in thought and deed, ready to claim a future that was theirs to shape. And in that rising, the universe itself felt the weight of a people who had learned that the greatest weapon was trust, courage, and the unity of hearts. Humanity ascends. The deserts and plains lay quiet beneath a sky that still glowed with the traces of warships that had tried to conquer Earth, but had failed. Humanity had stood and had won, yet the victory was more than the defeat of an enemy. It was proof that courage could bend steel, and that trust could become a weapon stronger than any plasma or lance. Ria Das walked among the Starborn tanks that hummed softly, their cores alive with the memory of every heartbeat, every thought, every fear and hope shared across deserts, plains, and the lunar surface. She felt the pulse of the bridge one last time and knew that humanity had changed forever. The pattern they had unlocked was no longer just a tool for battle, but a force that flowed in every mind, ready to choose unity over despair and courage over fear. Marko Iliev stood beside her, watching the horizon as the sun rose, spilling gold across steel and sand. Around them, the surviving Starborn crews checked their machines and shared quiet words with those who had fought alongside them. Children and families looked on from the safety of distant dunes, learning what it meant to fight not for glory but for one another. Across the world, people celebrated the end of mockery, the rise of human will, the proof that Earth could never be underestimated. In every city, the hum of engines and the laughter of children mixed like music with the distant memory of battle, teaching that bravery was more contagious than fear, and that no enemy, however advanced, could break what humans built together. Ria and Marko walked to the command tower where maps and models of distant worlds showed where lost human colonies awaited rescue. Plans for the homebound fleet were already taking shape, ships built with lessons learned from tanks and cores, designed to carry the chorus beyond Earth. Elder Kale, who had guided the firstborn from their distant world, joined them and spoke of the legacy they were leaving. The Starborn pattern would now live not only in machines but in every human mind that chose to awaken it through trust and courage. The bridge had shown them the way, and now that way stretched across the stars, a thread of hope and unity that no alien could sever. From orbit, the remaining Keth watched silently, their commanders unsure what had been unleashed. Laughter had turned to fear and calculation, the memory of humanity's power etched in every sensor, every recording. Humanity had not only survived but had risen above every expectation. The Starborn were no longer a secret or a relic of the past. They were a living testament to what humans could become when they chose to stand together, when they allowed courage and trust to flow through every decision, every heartbeat, every motion of body and machine as the first ships of the homebound fleet launched. Ria and Marko felt the hum of the cores settle into a quiet rhythm, a song that would not fade but would echo in every new journey. Humanity was ascending, moving beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond the stars that had once seemed unreachable. In the streets, in deserts, in factories, in schools, in every heart, people felt the pulse of the Starborn, a steady promise that when humans acted as one, no force in the galaxy could shake them. They had faced laughter, they had faced fear, and they had risen stronger, faster and braver than anyone had imagined. Ria turned to Marko and said softly that this was only the beginning, that the bridge had shown them a glimpse of what humanity could do when it believed in itself and each other. He nodded and smiled, feeling the weight of the past battles and the promise of all the battles yet to come. The Starborn hummed quietly beneath their hands, steady, eternal, waiting for the next challenge. The wind swept across the desert, carrying with it the smell of burning metal and hope, a promise that the legacy of courage and unity would endure. Across the planets, across moons, across distant colonies and unknown worlds, humanity rose, Starborn in thought and in action, unbroken and unstoppable, carrying the memory of those who had given all and the power of the bridge that bound them together. Their story would travel faster than any ship, reaching every world and every mind that could hear it, reminding the galaxy that the human spirit was a force that could not be laughed at or ignored. The stars would never forget the end,